Good day and a warm welcome to Galaxy Universal Network. This is Pan African News 360. I am your host, Sandana Mosagakabukuto, on your Viewers Corner today. I am with Mr. Raymond Chalom, who's going to actually give us more about what's happening in the SA judicial system. But before we can get to that, let me just welcome you, Mr. Chalom.
Thank you.
We really appreciate that you're here today, and I think it's one of those things that we couldn't wait to
Thank
have you
you.
in studio.
Thank you for the invite.
Yes. So I understand you are a practicing attorney, but maybe our viewers back home or wherever they are not too familiar on who you are. So probably if you can just, tell us more about yourself a little.
Well, I was admitted to practice as a qualified attorney in 1976. I worked for a very large firm of attorneys called Moss Morris for a number of years, 4 years. I then went on my own. I've been on my own ever since and run a practice ever since. So that is my situation at the moment.
So basically, the topic that we'll be looking at today, it is how the system, rather how the judicial system is actually going beyond the borders in terms of undermining the systems in which it should be operating, or rather the corruption that is happening within and how it's being ignored and not being given the attention that it deserves. And how can we then now educate the people of the Republic of South Africa on what they are entitled to, because everybody's entitled to information. So we will try by all means. It's such a very broad topic that we have today, but unfortunately due to time, and we also do apologize that we started a little late for small glitches that we had. So we'll try and make sure that we give it as much time as possible so that we can analyze this discussion. I mean, if we're talking of judicial system at this moment, we're talking of the cream de la cream of what's happening in South Africa at this moment. I mean, look at, your Mkhwebane, your president, everything that is happening at this case. It is literally hanging on the judicial system to make sure that our country goes back to square one. When you open the televisions, the news, everything, we're still talking about corruption, issues that are happening. At the end of the day, we need the judicial system to come and resolve these problems for us. And I would now hand it over to you so that you can elaborate a little bit more for us as to what is it that you mean when you say that you believe personally, as you said, this information has not been proven by any court of law so far, just so that we know. But due to your experience, I mean, you've got over 45 years of experience in the law industry, so you know exactly what you're talking about. These are the things that you've seen, these are the things that you've experienced, and you would want to make sure that you can enlighten other people, like myself. I'm just a journalist. I just need to know more on your field as to how are these things happening. If you're saying there's corruption in the judicial system, I mean, there shouldn't be corruption in there. That's where our lives are. Tell us more about that.
You must understand that the judicial system is part of the broad legal system. They work and operate together. The judicial system is not a system different from the legal system.
Yes.
It is a step up. As you go up the ladder, you eventually become a judge.
Yes.
But there is an Act of Parliament, it's Act number 12 of 2004, called the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act.
Yes.
And in particular, Section 8 of that Act deals with corruption inside of a judiciary.
Yes.
And it describes types of behavior that are by law corrupt. Judges have a very separate type of corruption from other people, for example, in government. And their corruption, or their possible corruption, is set out very clearly in this section. Now, if there is gratification of any kind for any person as a result of a judge inadequately performing his judicial function, that is corruption. If a judge delays or hinders or prevents the performance of a judicial function, and anybody gets some form of gratification out of it, that is corruption in law. I'm sure that you'll get many people phoning in saying how their matters have been delayed, saying how the judge didn't deal properly with their matter. For example, I'm aware of a judge who made a ruling that a plaintiff couldn't give evidence in his own trial and then dismissed the application because there was no evidence. That is corruption. It happens, it is difficult to prove, but there should be prosecutions, there should be investigations when complaints are laid with the National Prosecuting Authority. Unfortunately, we have a situation where there is a prevention of that type of thing. In practice, in theory, the question of judicial corruption is set out in this Act. But in practice, it never happens. Not that the corruption isn't happening, but that the prosecution for such corruption is not happening. They won't even investigate it. And that's a blocking, there is a blocking of these investigations by various bodies, including the Judicial Service Commission, including the Office of the Chief Justice, which to my amazement, I learned last week, remains a department of government. There should be a complete separation of powers. Why is the Office of the Chief Justice a department of government? We're 25 years into democracy. Why is that happening? It should have been, in the first year, it should have been made independent.
I would like to understand that that's been still the same system that was put together during the times of apartheid, which was not dismantled thereafter.
Well, it's disguised. There are little disguises here and there. But essentially, if you look at the basics, we are still dealing with a judicial system that was created under apartheid. Now, we have a Judicial Service Commission, and one of its duties and functions is to appoint judges. Now, if the judge appears to be completely incompetent, there is a provision easy to accomplish. It's a very difficult, almost impossible task, and would require politicians who are dedicated to fairness and justice and access to justice by people who can't afford it. It would require such a politician to motivate the removal of the Judicial Service Commission and the transfer of those obligations to a parliamentary committee.
I would like to believe that, that idea of removing the power from the judicial service system, obviously a far-fetched idea in terms of the way we're sitting in South Africa at the current moment. And our political system as well, on its own, it's just dismantled. It's everywhere. We've got parties inside other parties that are still existing. So I think this part is, as you said, it seems impossible that we can actually achieve. So how do we now try as ordinary South Africans to say, at least this is the list we can do in order to survive this mess that is happening? What are the things that we need to maybe focus on?
Judges need to be held accountable for the judgments they deliver constitutionally. Every judgment delivered by a judge, he should be obliged upon request to give constitutional reasons why his judgment is valid in this country. That is not happening. Now, people need to stand up, especially those involved in litigation, those involved in court actions. They need to stand up and say, I have a judgment, I am not happy with it, I want a constitutional justification why that judgment was issued. And there should be a means of enforcing that request. Therein lies one of the numerous problems. But if that could be resolved, if judges could be held accountable for their judgments, we would have moved 100 light years forward.
So basically, South African judges are not being held liable or responsible for any decision that they may take or whatsoever, which I would like to believe it's in contrary with what the Section 8 is is saying, right?
Absolutely, but it's more than Section 8. Because if you look at Section 47 of the Superior Courts Act, it is a word-for-word recreation of an apartheid law designed to protect corrupt judges. It prevents you from suing a judge for a false judgment. It prevents you from subpoenaing the judge to court to come and give evidence. And along with that is the Public Protectors section in Chapter 9 of the Constitution, which specifically excludes the public protector from dealing with judgments reported to her as corrupt. Who brings judges to book when someone has nudged them and said, listen, I don't like this particular litigant, find against him? Does it happen? I'm 100% certain it happens. Can I prove it? No.
So basically, the judges are becoming the lords of the law, if I could put it like
They're
that.
above the law.
You cannot, our constitution says there is nobody that is above the law.
Absolutely. It specifically mentions judges. Our constitution specifically says judges are subject to the Bill of Rights. And when a judge is sworn in, he swears an oath to uphold the Constitution and to uphold the Bill of Rights.
So what happens if they do not do what they
Nothing happens. My experience is that I think there are judges being appointed who don't even know what the Constitution is. Because when you talk to them in court, you can't talk to them. They don't understand what you're talking about. They haven't read it. Can I prove it? No.
But I mean, when we look into all what this, our own constitution is saying, basically it is telling us that we are being set up by our own system, whereby, you know, we put all our faith to somebody to take a decision about your life or your future, but that very same person is a human being, a normal human being like me and you. The person can be bribed, the person can, you know, anything can happen. The person can be biased, but maybe now I'm coming to open a case, or maybe I'm having a case against somebody that you know, a friend or a family member or whatsoever, that you are having a form of relationship with those people. So obviously you may or may not have, you know, the influence in taking a decision. But this will obviously mean that whatever decision that will be taken by that judge at that moment, whether right or wrong, I have no right or whatsoever to, you know, go and say, listen, I disagree with what this judge has said, or the decision that was taken by this judge. So basically, judges are above the law.
That's what's happening. That's practically what is happening. I'm of the view that when a judge is appointed, or before he's appointed, he should be submitted to an interrogation about his knowledge of the Constitution. No judge should be appointed to the bench without a clear knowledge of the Constitution and the oath he swears to uphold it and to uphold the Bill of Rights. I am of the view that there are judges who have absolutely no knowledge of the Constitution, and that is horrific. So when you talk about a judge can be bribed, it's not only a question of bribery, it's a question of lack of knowledge, where it might suit the judge to find in favor of one litigant as opposed to another because of some private knowledge that he has and a lack of constitutional knowledge that what he's doing is wrong. You understand, there are elements to it.
Yes, I get it. So is there no process where the judges are being trained on this?
Not to my knowledge. Back in 1996, when the Constitutional Court accepted the Constitution, I believe there was a Canadian offer to train our judges in constitutional law and its application in the court system. And I believe that offer was turned down. And now we have this situation where you've got judges who really don't know what they are doing when it comes to the Constitution. And that's a real problem. And you must remember, even at the High Court level, judges must apply the Constitution. It's not limited to the Constitutional Court. The Constitution itself says it's applicable to all laws. It's applicable to all judges. But this seems to have been played down, ignored. It's really bad.
So now, what does this mean to a standard South African person I'm from Gwamhlabiyalingana, in the northern KwaZulu-Natal, way down very far, where there's really nothing much happening. But now somebody's sitting there watching and trying to figure out what does this, the whole corruption within the judicial system mean, and how does it affect that person. Another person is just sitting in Alex, is just listening to us talking here, but they will be like, how is it my business? How does it affect me? What does it mean in my future?
All people, all citizens in this country have rights entrenched in the Constitution.
Of course.
There's a whole lot of rights, from the right of association, to the right of freedom of speech, to the right of access to court, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Now, when a judge is not aware intimately of how these rights should be applied in a matter which you have brought before the court for some reason, maybe you're getting divorced, maybe you're having some paternity problems, maybe you are having problems relating to children, or any other type of problem, business problems, these rights apply. And if the judge doesn't know how to apply them, he's basically applying ordinary law which might not be correct.
Of course.
And so it affects every individual. I believe people should have a right of access to court. It should be free, and the whole question of costs orders needs to be re-examined.
Yes.
Very definitely so. And it's not only for people who can't afford it, for all people. Costs orders should not follow the event.
Yes.
Which is the happy apartheid saying, if you lose your matter, you pay the other side's costs. No, why? If I'm trying to enforce one of my rights, even if I don't succeed, let's assume one of my witnesses dies and I don't succeed, why must I pay the government its costs?
Yes.
You think the government can't afford those costs?
It takes us back to one of the very interesting topics that we have in these current days, the issue of the Office of the Public Protector. There's been this back and forth between, it's not just the matter between the president or the Pravin Gordhan, or it's just the matter, like different cases. The other issue with the ABSA case. So it's a lot happening around that. But now the public protector is now found that she has to pay, in some cases, 80%, in some cases, 10% and whatsoever. Okay, others would say she's being attacked for some reason, but let us just get to understand here as to if the case has been brought to her table. This is what I've been always trying to figure out. They come complain to her, and her obligation, she's obligated to investigate those cases.
Exactly.
She's obligated to, at the end of the day, carry out her responsibilities, which is why she's appointed to be in that office. And now if she finds whatever that she finds and come back and say, these are my findings, and then they're like, no, we disagree. And we think that you've wasted all the money. Now you need to pay because you didn't find... How does this work?
Those costs orders are an abuse of power. And what is needed is that Parliament needs to pass laws preventing judges from doing this. That's what needs to happen. But it takes a strong politician to get that one going. The fact is that cost orders are being abused left, right and centre. If you don't like a particular person, for a moment let's put the public protector aside, because she's a large figure, she is a subject of a lot of media. Let's take an ordinary person off the street that has a little claim of some kind or other. Why should she get a costs order against her for trying to enforce her rights? It's an outrage, really.
It doesn't make sense.
It actually reduces what is supposed to be democracy back to nothingness. it needs to be attended to.
There are bodies, in South Africa that actually looks into how our legal system works, and So, what are those bodies doing if such things are happening in our own judicial system?
You'll find many of those bodies have political bias, and many of the poor people that come to them are just a means for them to get attention, to be noted, to get membership, and so on. You'd have to convince me that a body is genuine. And when you start talking about legal aid, please, that should have been abolished in 1994. There should be no such thing as legal aid. Attorneys should be obliged to represent certain people on highly reduced fees, and there should be access into the system. But an attorney is not going to do that if he knows that there's a possibility of costs orders that he's not going to be able to manage, that he might get costs orders against him. They do that too. They don't like what the attorneys do. They make costs orders against him, just like they've done with Ms. Mqobani. So costs orders need to be looked at a parliamentary level, and there needs to be a control of how the courts implement them. That is what needs to be done. That's my view.
Do you think we are still being controlled by the apartheid system right now?
Very much. Very much. Apartheid is like a dirty, stinky glue that is very sticky, and it sticks into all the corners of anything you try to do. And when you try to get it out, it is very difficult. We need to get rid of all the remnants of apartheid.
Okay, now on a lighter note, yesterday the judgment came out with regards to the old South African flag. What's your take in that? I'm sure, obviously, you've lived in the days where you were flagging that flag as your proud South African.
I've never waved that flag. Never,
why is
never
that
ever.
South African
Not
flag,
since a child. I think that it is offensive. I think the judgment is correct. And I think anyone who can't see that needs to go and emigrate to somewhere that will accept his racism. First of all, the judgment should never have been necessary. Nobody should have been using that as any form, because it's a form of abuse, really.
Of course.
And the fact that a judgment was needed tells me that there's a lot of racism underlying what's in this country.
There is still the stem in our national anthem, which is still the part of that flag, in my opinion. So I can't really speak much. I was born almost close to the end of apartheid. But looking back at what our mothers and fathers have gone through in our country to put the country where it is today, I still believe that there's still a lot to do. But it is tough where we have to debate around this, even the national anthem itself.
I do not,
what's your view?
I will not sing this stem. It's that simple, and I wish all people would follow my lead. We need to get rid of it. It needs to be taken out as part of the anthem of this country, and we need to forget that it exists. Really, it must go away.
You had it, Mzansi. In my opinion, too, I think that part of our national. I'm glad that when I get to that part, we're like, just. But then at the end of the day, it's part of history. Some people would argue and say, listen, this is part of where we come from, probably because the people that are actually trying to defend this racist flag, or even the part of our national anthem that is also so racist, they're defending it in the name of, oh, you know what, it's still part of our history, it's part of where we're coming from, we can't just walk away from it, we need to put it in there. Well, in my opinion, I think, okay, fine, put it in history, bury it there, and just move on.
Get a small paragraph as an annexure to history books with 2 lines saying that this existed once upon a time.
Just
and that's
2
it.
paragraphs?
Just 2 lines, 1 paragraph.
Oh, okay, 1.
1 paragraph.
Wow, okay. We still have a lot to discuss. However, we're just going to cut the matter very short, and then we're still going to have you again to come back, because we've got thousands of things that we still need to discuss with Mr. Chalom. But before we close, I would want you to give us just a brief on what's the way forward from now. Like, I am a South African, I'm out there. I want to help. I want to do something. I want to change the way things are happening in our country. I want to change the way things are happening in our judicial system. And there are very young, passionate people out there, very young and educated attorneys that wants to grow and study further and become judges in the near future. And we want to make sure that we impact change. So what would you recommend as a seasoned attorney as a way forward for us to take in order to change the way things are happening?
Legal practitioners must be freed to practice their profession. Now, what I've just said is diametrically opposed to the Legal Practice Act, which collects all legal practitioners into a big circle and makes them subject to the Minister of Justice, which is a complete breach of the separation of powers. The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa in 1996 was accepted by the Constitutional Court on the condition that the separation of powers applies. So it is more powerful than a clause in the Constitution, because it was the basis upon which the Constitution was accepted.
Yes.
Now, if you undermine that basis, you are undermining the whole Constitution.
Yes.
And so the Legal Practice Act is so unconstitutional. To have an act like that passed is an outrage. They have taken words out of the Constitution and they have incorrectly said what these words mean. There is a word in section 22, it's the word practice. The practice of a profession can be regulated by law. And they've said that word now means all the professionals. No, it doesn't. Not since I've been speaking English, and that's a pretty long time. That word means that the repetitive work of practitioners can be regulated by law, not the practitioners themselves.
Yes.
They have got to be freed up to investigate communities. There have been thousands of people struck off the roll, lawyers or legal professionals. The Constitution doesn't allow for professionals to be struck off the roll. There's no provision in our Constitution which says that they can terminate rights. You can limit rights under Section 36, but you can't terminate them. So who is this judiciary that has taken upon itself to breach the Constitution and terminate people's rights?
So I think the problem is still on a space where there's no separation of power.
Correct.
So
that's what's happening.
That's where the issue is. And actually, the reason why we have all this different bodies, it's because we need to separate power. You cannot just hand over the entire power into one structure. At the end of the day, it dismantles.
Well, the difference between apartheid and democracy. Apartheid had the same elements of government. It had a legal system, it had a parliament, it had an executive. Democracy has a legal system, it has a parliament, it has an executive. And you would be excused for thinking that they were the same. The difference between apartheid and democracy is that apartheid centralized all control. The executive, the government, controlled the legal system. The government controlled the parliament. The government controlled everything.
Yes.
In democracy, you get the three elements that are designed to limit each other. There must always be a tension between the legal system and the executive.
Exactly.
There must always be a tension between the legal system and parliament. A tension between parliament and the executive. That way they control each other's excesses. But when you get one section controlling everything, you've lost the fight.
We are in a democratic country, and the ball is in our hand on what we do with the information that is handed over in our hands. And obviously, as Mr. Chalom said, that these facts that he was bringing on the table, they are not proven by any judicial court to be true or that's correct, right? However, these are the experiences that he has gone through. And I mean, when we're taking what it is written on our own constitution vis-a-vis what is happening in nowadays, I mean, when we're still sitting earlier, I wouldn't want us to pass this. You made an example of the time when you went into court and sat there and listened and even took some recordings of what was happening, and then you compared that to the transcript and you realized that these were two separate things. This obviously means that the judges just sit there and do whatever they do. They do as they please.
I'm glad you raised this point.
Yes.
It's very, very important. There is an unwritten rule that when transcribers transcribe the scripts of cases, that they are obliged to give it to the judges before they give it to the parties. That is extremely bad and subject to corruption. The parties should get those transcripts first and then the judges. And in that way, the judge cannot change what's in that transcript. That is because the transcript essentially is evidence of what occurred in court.
Yes.
And where a judge changes, he doesn't like what he said here, he'll just leave it out or change one or two words. That must be prevented from happening. And you might think, oh, it never happens, and I'm sure you're going to get judges coming out and say, that doesn't happen. I have an example of where it happened, and I'm sure it happens regularly.
So if you want proof, Mr. Chalom is here to give it to you. Don't ask me. Well, in closing, Mr. Chalom, do you have anything that you'd like to share with South Africans out there?
I think there's hope, but we must resist. The secret is to resist the executive taking over the legal system, the executive being control of parliament. We've got to resist that as citizens and individuals in this country. This is our country, this is our South Africa. It is all in our hands on what do we do with it. My name is Sandra Mosaka Kuto, your girl from all the way from Lingana. This is Galaxy Universal Network right here on Pan African 360. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you very much.